Just like that, we've reached our final call of the Season 9 premiere. This submission is spooky. I'm not sure what to make of it, but I can confirm that it is a good one. The following was submitted by Danny in my state of California.
Hey Derek, this is Danny from California again. I went to a wedding last year in Lake Tahoe. It was August 2018. My friend Jimmy and Angelica's wedding. We left the last name because this relates to actually Jimmy. So we were at the rehearsal dinner the night before at one of the breweries in Lake Tahoe, and we were all sitting around. It was probably 11 o'clock at night, kind of the winding down of just hanging out together before the big day the next day. And Jimmy is a cop from San Diego. I won't name his actual specific location in San Diego since it's a big place. But he was like, hey, do you believe in ghosts? And I was like, yeah, I believe in ghosts. I mean, like, I have a healthy skepticism towards it, but at the same time, like, I would like to believe. And anyway, he pulled out his phone, and he had 2 surveillance videos from the jail that he works at. And I don't know whether he had downloaded them or whether he was just taking a video of the screen surveillance to get them on their phone. They looked very good, though. And the first one was they were processing a woman who had been arrested, and they're processing her to be actually taken into the holding cell. And she had her hands handcuffed behind her back. And in the video, you can see little pieces of her hair start to move, like, upwards. And then she's yanked down and she falls on the ground, and there are 4 or 5 different officers who are around her, like, on their knees, trying to, like, get her back up, but also get whatever is pulling her hair to be released. And I have to be honest, while I was immediately intrigued and got a little, chill down my spine, I also kind of thought it was BS, like he was pulling this from a movie or something like that. And I was like, I don't know. I don't believe you, Jimmy. Like, prove that to me. I know it's on a video, but it's not, anything that you couldn't have, pulled off the internet. And he's like, look at the timestamp. This is my jail. And I was like, okay, that's pretty reasonable. And he said, but look at this one. And he, flipped his iPhone to the next screen, which was just a midnight video. It was 1 or 2 in the morning, it seemed like, and all of the cells were closed. But apparently, at the jail that he works at, there is a cell block that has a lot of vacancies. In terms of, I think it's being reconstructed or under some sort of renovation. And there is a door that is open, and very, very slowly it closes. And I was like, well, it could just be, some sort of automated door, like there's a malfunction or whatever. And he was like, there's no motors in those doors. Like, there's nothing that's connecting them to closing. And I was like, okay, it could be a draft. And he was like, no, this is just one of the videos. Like, this happens very frequently, and it's only this door in the jail that shuts and slides shut. Anyway, Jimmy strikes me as someone that is incredible. I've known him for 20 years now. He's incredibly straight-laced, I guess is the word. I mean, he's a cop. He doesn't really have a lot of time to, in his mind anyway, to entertain these sorts of supernatural things. Anyway, it's just stuck with me for the last year, and I thought I'd share it. So I would like to know anyone's thoughts, and your thoughts too, Derek. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Danny. What a creepy story. Now that is some footage I would want to see. My initial thought when hearing the story is, how did the officers react? I'm sure they're all used to people coming up with insane reasons why they can't be jailed. Why wouldn't they assume that this would be more of the same? But at a certain point, it sounds like the officers realized something odd was taking place. So how did they react then? Did they continue to monitor her while she was in her cell? I'll tell you what, the story has raised so many questions for me. Maybe a listener out there can answer a few of those. And while you're at it, maybe take a crack at a few of these as well. Is there a movie that shows a similar scene? Maybe Danny's initial suspicion was correct. Maybe this was a clip from a film. I'd also want to know if anyone else has heard this story, or perhaps laid eyes on the footage. I realize it's a long shot, but you never know. There may be a listener out there that was in the room that day. Despite all the questions, I thoroughly enjoyed the submission, Danny. So thank you for spending the time to send it to us. Now, before I sign off, I just want to quickly thank tonight's callers for their stories and for their service. I come from a family of first responders. My grandfather, uncle, brother, and cousin were all officers. My mom was an EMT for a very long time, and I know several firefighters, both volunteer and professionally. So I understand the sacrifices these brave people make. So a huge thank you to each and every first responder out there, making our lives safer. We are very grateful. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Addie Lloyd and Warren Pond Abbott. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. That terrifying score that you're hearing? Well, that's co.ag. Thank you so much for listening, and until next week. So tonight's secret story is very long. That said, the following was submitted anonymously from the state of Texas. Hi, Derek. I love the podcast and hearing of all the submissions. I made my first a couple of weeks ago and was very excited when I saw you put out the request for stories/encounters from first responders. So I've decided to share one of mine. Since I'm still active law enforcement, I would rather not have my name revealed, and I will just use initials for the others in this account, as well as omitting specific locations. So let's get started. I started my career with the U.S. Border Patrol over 20 years ago, here in South Texas. Being federal agents, a lot of people outside the border regions don't necessarily think of us as first responders. However, in sparsely populated rural counties like I work in, we are the largest law enforcement agency, and as such, are usually the first on the scene of accidents, brush fires, and other calls for assistance from the state and county levels. My encounter took place back in February of 2003 as a response to a call from the county dispatch. My partner, we will refer to him as D, and I were on duty that night, working the graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. when we got a call over the radio. A passing motorist had called and said they had almost hit what they assumed to be a family, a man, woman, and child, walking along the shoulder of a dark farm-to-market road. They said they were concerned for the safety since the road was not well lit. The area they were walking was a blind curve, and the child appeared to be wearing shorts and a t-shirt in the cold weather. Yes, it does get down to the 30s in South Texas, especially in January and February. The caller also said that when they went back to look for them and offer help, they couldn't find them, and they assumed they must have run into the brush. Since we are the closest unit to the area, Dee and I responded to the location to see if we could find anyone there. We cruised back and forth through the stretch of road, using the alley light in our vehicle to light up the brush line of the road to see if they had taken shelter off the road. But we couldn't come up with anything. I have to add that while the brush was quite thick on the south side of the road, the north side was predominantly pastures, with the brush line pushed a good quarter-mile off the road. On our last pass, I was scanning the south side from the passenger seat D was driving and looking to the north. Suddenly, he stopped and said he thought he had seen someone on the north side. He turned around and parked the truck and got out to take a look. Out in the pasture to the north, maybe 100 yards off the road, sat an old abandoned ranch house. D said he thought he had seen someone near the corner of the house, so we grabbed our flashlights and climbed the fence to take a look. As we got about 20 yards from the house, we both saw what appeared to be a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, looking at us from around the corner of the house. As we got even closer, he stepped into full view, and sure enough appeared to be wearing shorts in this weather. As I called out to him to see if he was all right, he smiled and then turned away from us, walking off. I then ran toward him, and D proceeded to cut around the opposite side of the house, thinking he would either cut him off or I would catch up to him. I made it to the southern corner of the house, where we first spotted him, just in time to see him round the north end of the house and out of my view. As I continued on and rounded the north end of the house, I came face to face with D, who had come from the opposite end. We ran into each other, then stepped back looking at each other. D asked me where the kid was, and I told him I was right behind him when he rounded this corner, asking D if he'd seen him. When he said no, we both stood there, looking at each other for a bit, trying to figure out what had happened. Now the brush line was still 50 to 60 yards north of us, and there was no way a small child could have covered that amount of ground in the 1 or 2 seconds he was out of my view. So we thought maybe he had holed up in the house. We began circling the old residence looking for a way in, but the place was boarded up. We did find one broken out window with a loose board over it, so we got in there to take a look around. Nothing. No sign of a person being there for years. But plenty of evidence of small animals, raccoons and such. Once back out, Dee and I decided to see if we could find any foot sign of the child, or the rest of the family he was supposedly seen with. Now Dee and I were what is affectionately known as brush dogs, meaning our abilities to track people through the inhospitable brushlands of South Texas was well above average. We lived for tracking out in the ranches, the ultimate game of hide and seek, but damned if we couldn't find anything. We made systematic cuts in circles, started from the perimeter of the house, then arching out further and further until we hit the brush line, searching for footprints in the sandy soil, or a grass trail or something to indicate where they went. We could not find a thing, and after a good hour, we headed back to our ride. Once back in the truck, we sat in silence for a little bit, trying to figure out what happened while we warmed back up from the cold. Dee was the first to broach the subject, asking me if I thought something seemed off about the kid. I told him I did, and I thought about it for a bit, trying to put my finger on what it was that struck me about him. I finally told Dee what it was that bothered me about it. The way he smiled at us before he turned away. There was nothing malevolent about it. In fact, the exact opposite. It was the innocent smile of a child playing a game. It just didn't fit with the circumstances. By that I mean the isolated area, the cold and damp weather, and the darkness of the night. Most people that we find in this area, or even walking down the side of this desolate stretch of road, are happy to be found by us, even if they are going to be deported, but they get out of the elements, get a meal, medical treatment if needed, etc. It is a much better alternative than dying alone in an unfamiliar country due to the harsh elements. Families especially find relief in us taking them into custody, rather than entertain the thought of their child perishing out here. But this was so different and strange. Plus, where were the adults that had been traveling with them? After discussing it for quite some time, we put it to rest, never really coming to a conclusion, or at least one that either of us were willing to share aloud. We finished our shift and didn't really talk about it again. Over the course of the next few weeks, there would be several other reports of this nature from various motorists. Always the same blind curve on the same stretch of road with the same description of people. Every report ended in the same response from the units involved. Negative contact with the subject reported. One of the last nights working graveyards before we rotated to the day shift for 6 weeks, I was paired up with an old, salty agent who had been stationed there his entire career. We will refer to him as G. That night, another report came over the radio. Same traffic, same location, same description. As I sat there listening to another unit acknowledge the call and say that they were responding, G chuckled and said, "Good luck, boys. They ain't gonna find nothing out there. You can't catch a damn ghost." As he looked over at me grinning, his expression changed. I must have been pale or something because he studied me for a minute and asked if I was all right. I stammered for a second, then said, "Yeah, I'm good." G continued to look at me for a minute. Then, the slightest smile crept on his face, and he said, "You've seen him, haven't you?" I acted as if I had no idea what he meant, and told him no. G laughed and said, "Boy, I've been breaking criminals and liars longer than you've been alive. It's a good thing you're on this side of the badge, because you're a terrible liar. Now tell me you've seen him, ain't you?" After a bit, I recounted the experience that Dee and I had a few weeks prior. After I told him, G sat back in the driver's seat and told me that he'd seen him too, years ago, and that plenty of others had as well. It just wasn't something that got talked about. He then told me how the encounters had started. Apparently, years before I had ever started my career, there actually had been a family, mom, dad, and son, walking down the shoulder of this road at night. Unfortunately, a vehicle coming around this blind curve ventured into the shoulder of the road, striking and killing all three on the spot. The sighting started a few years after that. But as I said, no one really talks about it. From time to time, some of us who have seen them may discuss it among ourselves after a few beers at quote-unquote choir practice, which is what we call it after we have a few drinks after work. But on the whole, it isn't something that is broadcast, for fear of ridicule. Now, as a supervisor, I spend most of my time in the office, reviewing reports and taking care of other administrative duties. But I'm still always listening to the radio traffic, and every so often you hear a report of a family of three walking on the farm-to-market road, followed by the voice of an often young, eager agent responding. It brings a little smile to my face, and I think about what G said. Good luck, boys. You ain't gonna find nothing. So that's my experience. Take it for what it's worth, but I know what Dee and I saw that night, and what happened. Keep up the good work. I love listening on my commute back and forth to work. Well, thank you, caller, for sharing that terrifying tale. This is exactly the sort of story I expected to hear on this special. So thank you again for sharing that. And thank you for sticking around to the end of the program. Have a great night. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Now I hope that each and every one of you is safe at home, or at the very least, practicing some sort of social distancing. But we're not here to talk about all of that. We are here to hear some stories. Some scary stories. So I'll waste no time in queuing up the first call. To kick things off, we begin in the state of Iowa. The following was submitted to me anonymously.
Hi, Monsters Among Us. I wanted to tell you about what happened to me last summer, the summer of 2018. I'm currently working my second summer at the summer camp that I grew up going to. And last summer I had kind of a creepy experience when I was on ranch camp. We had a cabin of about 8 girls, and we were staying in the barn, in one of the cabins in the barn, which is a good 10-minute walk from main camp. And it was night 2. We had sat everybody down. We had asked them, like, how'd you sleep? We were doing night devos, that kind of thing. And one of the girls, like, they started talking about, like, the dreams that they had had that night. And one of the girls goes, yeah, you know, I had this really weird dream. I dreamt that, like, this super tall guy walked into our bathroom. And we were all like, oh, that's kind of weird. And one of the other girls goes, wait, you saw that too? And just instant chills down everybody's spines. And a third girl speaks up and goes, yeah, I thought I dreamed that. And so we started asking them about it, and they're like, they were able to describe him in pretty good detail. They said that he was much taller than any of us. It couldn't have been my co-cabin leader or myself, because both of us are kind of short, and the tallest camper in our cabin that week was maybe only a couple inches taller than we were. And they said that this man's head came like above the top of the top bunk bed, which is maybe 6 feet, maybe 6.5 feet tall. And they said that he like sauntered into the bathroom and did not come out because he had really dark black hair, and he was wearing a brown long-sleeved shirt. And we were just so freaked out. I was talking to my cabin leader, like, who could this possibly be? What's going on? And we like immediately contacted the camp executives, and we're asking, like, could somebody have gotten in? What's going on? We asked every male cabin leader, like every male staff member, if they for some reason had been in our cabin that night, if they had maybe walked by the window and the girls dreamt that they were in the cabin, and no one was near the barn at that point. So we were terrified. Like, we checked all of the camp security footage. There was nobody matching that description. There wasn't even a single male staff member who had a brown long sleeved shirt. Like, nobody could possibly have matched that description. And so we're a Bible camp. So we believe pretty strongly in like spiritual warfare. So yeah, we were pretty terrified from that night on. And the barn doesn't have like locks on it. We didn't really know what to do from then on. We just prayed really hard and didn't see anything for the rest of the week. But yeah, that was my experience last summer. And I gotta be honest, I've been like keeping my eyes open for that kind of thing now that I'm back here this summer. But yeah.
Thank you, caller. That is a scary situation, especially with other people's kids involved. That is also a detail I think is important to point out. It seems that the children stuck with their story, even after the adults in charge began to grow concerned. So does their willingness to stick with the story mean they're telling the truth? And that leads me to my next obvious question. Was this man real or a specter of some sort? Was this man a ghost or something more terrifying? But as creepy as this experience seems to be, it could have gone much, much worse.
Since the late 1920s, Camp Scott in northeastern Oklahoma was a retreat for Girl Scouts to play, learn, and grow in the great outdoors. But on the night of June 13, 1977, it was the scene of a grisly murder that left 3 girls dead and a community terrified. The victims, 8-year-old Lori Farmer, 9-year-old Michelle Gousset, and 10-year-old Doris Milner, were killed in their sleep as their friends and camp counselors slept just a few feet away. They had arrived just the day before they were killed and were getting ready for a 2-week trip at the camp with their friends. A counselor found all 3 bodies scattered along a trail leading to the camp showers, wrapped in their sleeping bags. The rest of the girls were sent home without being told much, but learned of the murders when they reunited with their parents, who were praying their daughters were not killed. But a dark mark started growing at the camp 2 months prior to the killings. During a training session for camp counselors, a tent was ransacked. Left behind was a handwritten note with a prophetic message warning 3 campers would be murdered. That note was dismissed as a prank and thrown in the trash. Other events leading up to the girls' arrival came to light during the investigation, and Lori Farmer's mother said if she knew what was going on, she would never let her daughter go.
If I had known a tent had been slashed the night before Lori was to get on the bus to go, I would have never let her go.
But after the bodies of the 3 young girls were found the morning after they were beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted, that note was the only clue to the killer.
Now that clip comes courtesy of One American News Network. I know that is a dark and depressing story, but I couldn't help but notice the similarities to both stories' setups. So thank you again, caller, for sharing that terrifying experience. All right, I'll admit, That was a lot to take in. So let's step back and reset with something a little less panic-inducing. Well, it just so happens that April, from the state of Alabama, has a story that I think will work perfectly.
Hi, I'm calling in today about astral projection. My name is April and I'm from Alabama. My story took place about 22 years ago when I was 15 years old. I came across your podcast and I found the story about astral projection. It's not very common on your show, but I was kind of toying around with the idea of calling in, so I finally got up the courage to do so. So here's the story. Back when I was 15, I was in summer school, actually. I failed geometry, so I had to attend summer school. And that summer, my friend who had her driver's license already, I was 15, she was 16, she was supposed to pick me up from my house that morning to go to summer school. So that morning, I woke up and I kind of was shaken because I had this, what I thought was crazy dream, right? So the dream was that I had kind of like visualized myself in my dream where I was in a parking lot and I was above a car, and it was a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. And, you know, I was kind of like, I would say like an aerial view of the car, and I could see everything that was happening below me. And it was nighttime in my dream, what I thought was a dream. And so I could see the car, I could see the door opening, and I could see inside a person, like, but I was like in the eyes of the person at this time. It's kind of foggy, this memory, this actual part of the memory, but, you know, long story short, what ended up happening was I'm seeing what's going on in my dream, that the speakers in the back of this car are being cut. Like I can see wires being cut and speakers being taken out. So, you know, the car is being broken into in my dream, right? So I'm like, wow, that's really a weird dream. And so my friend calls me and she's late. She's late picking me up. And she calls me and she's like, April, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be late. I'm so pissed off. My car has gotten broken into. They've stolen my stereo system and my speakers out of my car. And this is like her first car. And back in the late 90s, it was like really cool to have like a great sound system. And she paid a lot of money for these speakers. And she said, you know, someone broke in and stole this stuff. And I like literally got chills all over my body. Like I get chills thinking about this right now. But she said that to me, and I said, Ashley, I said, I dreamt about this happening. And she was like, what? And I was like, yes, I was there. But it was like I was above, like watching all of this happen. And, you know, and all I can think of, the only explanation that I can come up with was that, like, it, you know, when I was asleep, my soul or whatever being, entity that lives inside of me left my body, traveled to where her car was, and was there for this thing to happen, because there's really no other explanation for it. And that moment was kind of like a pivotal moment for me, where I was like certain that there like really is something beyond this life, you know. We do have a soul. Like I really truly believe that. So that's my story. I would really love to hear other astral projection stories if there are any people who could call in and share more. So I hope you enjoy the story, and thanks for the podcast. I really enjoy listening to it on my 45-minute commute to work. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, April. Given today's current situation, I feel like astral travel is about the only travel any of us are going to be doing anytime soon. Now, astral travel is essentially a person's ability to separate psyche from body. Essentially, the sleeping body stays put, but the mind's eye is free to wander. Now, if I'm honest, I don't really see much of a difference between astral travel, out-of-body experience, or remote viewing. All three of them seem to lead to the same place. So maybe ask yourself that, April. Which of those abilities, if any, are most like your experience? And thank you again for taking the time to share that experience. Now, before we move on to our next call, I can finally announce that there are new shirts and totes in the shop. Visit monstersamonguspodcast.com/shop and see the brand new red and mauve t-shirt designs by listener and talented artist Greg Johnson. And while you're at it, be sure to add on a tote. These beauties feature a design by listener and gifted designer Jamie Murray. I expect these items to go quickly, so head over to the website today. Our next devilishly delectable description was delivered by Drew here in the state of California.
How's it going, man? This is Drew from Northern California. I found your podcast a couple of months ago. Been a relatively regular listener. I listen on my drives back from work and while I'm working. Anyway, I appreciate the podcast. Quick story for you. It's not mine. It's actually a buddy of mine who I work with. We're electricians, like I said, up here in Northern California. And if you know anything about the electrical industry, you know it's pretty much a no BS work environment. You got guys from all different kinds of walks of life, but the dudes that last in the industry are pretty straightforward, straight shooter, just to the point guys. And one of my coworkers, buddy of mine, as we were all getting ready in the morning time to go out to our various jobs, we're just talking about things that we've seen, stories, just shooting the breeze, and somehow I think we were talking about a TV show or a couple of different TV shows we'd watched, and those led to real stories. And this dude of mine, he starts telling his story, and he says this happened a handful of years ago, but he says that he was in his house, standing in the middle of a hallway in his house, and he lives up kind of in the foothills, kind of in no man's land. Standing up in the middle of the hallway a handful of years ago, all of a sudden he looks over and he sees a deer. Sees this deer, and then realizes, I didn't see it, I'm just relaying what he said, realizes that on this deer is a Native American. He looks the Native American in the eye, so to speak, and all of a sudden the deer just rushes him with the Native American on it holding the horns. And so as this deer is coming at him, he screams and he just ducks for cover, and the thing just disappeared as he screamed and ducked for cover. Whether it went over him or however you want to put it, it was gone. And to me, that's a pretty far out stretch. I don't know that I would believe it, but sitting next to this guy in the morning as he's telling a couple of us the story, I see the goosebumps on his skin begin to form. I kid you not, his skin looked like it was dead chicken skin. It's just covered in goosebumps. And just watching his body language, watching the goosebumps form up, he at least believes what he's saying. And again, this dude's a straight shooter, kind of a roughneck cat. Not a lot of BS to what he's telling you on a regular basis. I've not known him to tell stories, and I've known him for a good long while. Kind of a trip. Thought maybe you could use that one. Once again, really enjoy the podcast. Keep doing what you're doing, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew. That is a new one on me. I can't say I've ever heard of anything similar to this. Now, as I do with almost every call, I did a few minutes worth of internet research in hopes of jarring a story loose that even remotely resembled Drew's, but I had no luck. So I thought maybe this was some sort of regional thing, or at the very least, cultural. So if you have any information on Drew's experience, or any paranormal encounter for that matter, why don't you give the hotline a call at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Thanks again, Drew, for sharing that encounter. Alright, well, I have stacks of stories to share, each twice as spooky as the one before. So, to kick this stint off, we begin with what should be a familiar voice. The following was sent in from the UK. This is Paul's ghostly experience.
Hi Derek, it's Paul from Mysteries and Monsters. So I just thought I'd finally take the plunge and give you a call, seeing as Addy keeps telling me I've got to ring in. So here's my story. So it was really the lady that rang up from Ohio with the mysterious Mamas and Papas CD situation. And it reminded me of something that happened back in 1996. I was living in a shared house in Sheffield with a couple of really good friends of mine. And on an evening we would often sort of chill out, we'd watch a bit of TV, bit of football, or listen to some music. And this particular evening, we'd been listening to an album on a CD, and it got to about 10 o'clock, and we turned the music off, and I think we were playing some PlayStation back in the day. So we were playing about between us, the three of us, and we'd been at it about 45 minutes. And then all of a sudden, the CD player just started playing. Really came out of nowhere. Nobody was near it. It was over in the corner, and it just decided to kick off, which didn't seem so strange at first until obviously went over and realised it had started on the 10th track of that particular album. Now, we hadn't paused it. We'd actually turned the machine off. It was no power, nothing was happening at all. And like I say, nobody was anywhere near it. Not all of us were focused on the TV. Nobody could come in. The door was locked. There was no way someone could have sneaked in and done it. So we had a look at it and thought, well, that's a bit peculiar. But it was the key fact that it had started on track number 10, which really threw us. So we tried to replicate it, turned the machine off, turned it back on, started on track 1, paused it, turned it off, turned it back on, started on track 1. Whatever we did, we could not get it to replicate starting at track 10 whatsoever. Didn't matter if we took the CD out, put it back in, paused it, stopped it, turned it off, turned it on. Even pausing the track on track 10 and then turning the machine off, turning it back on, would automatically start the CD again on the first track. And it was the beginning. From that point onwards in the house, we really started to have some strange things going on. I was pushed down the stairs. One of my housemates was pushed down the stairs. We had things moving upstairs and downstairs. So there was one occasion where I left the keys downstairs on the front table. All the house was locked up. Went to the bathroom, came downstairs, keys were gone. Thinking, right, okay, that's a bit odd. Went back upstairs, and they were on the top of the stairs, on the floor, on the carpet. And the longer we stayed in the house, the more malicious things started to get. So money would disappear from wallets. And when you're living together and things like that, it's very easy to sort of think that someone's stealing or something like that was going on. But none of that was occurring at all, because things would disappear when you were on your own. There would be nobody else in. We all worked different shifts at different times, or we'd all be out together. So it was really, really odd. And overall, it was just a very strange solution. And obviously, with the young lady's call from the other week from Ohio, I just thought I'd mention one of my new notable spooky experiences. So I hope that's all right for you and the rest of the Mousters out there. Keep up the great work. Absolutely love the show. Love the Facebook pages and everything. All power to you all, guys. Take care. And we'll speak again sometime with probably another one of my spooky stories. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul. Coincidentally, Paul happens to host a charming podcast in which he interviews some of the biggest names in the paranormal realm. And although I don't fit into that category, Paul was still nice enough to ask me to come on and chat. So if you're home alone and bored, check out the Mysteries and Monsters link in tonight's show notes. My episode drops on April 6th. Okay, Paul. So I used most of your discussion time plugging your show, but I did want to ask if the unit was plugged in when it suddenly came to life. I assume that it was, otherwise I feel like that'd be something you would be sure to mention, but I wanted to at least verify that. And also I wanted to applaud your debunking attempts. It's nice to see a level-headed reaction to a strange event. Thank you again, Paul, for sharing. And speaking of being stuck at home bored, if you haven't noticed, I've been putting a lot of content out lately. A lot of it, live videos on Facebook. Well, one of the newest offerings is a partnership with Into the Fray's Shannon LeGros. Each Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, Shannon, myself, and 4 other podcast hosts answer your questions live, real time, on Facebook. We're calling it the Paranormal Podcast-alypse. And before you say it, I've already heard people say they can't get it because they're not on Facebook. Well, I have some great news. You don't have to be a Facebook user to watch it. Simply click the link and it should still work. So join us this Sunday when we will be talking Bigfoot and the Fae Folk with Cam and Kyle from Expanded Perspectives, Bryce Johnson from Bigfoot Collectors Club, and, of course, Mr. David Flora from Blurry Photos. Oh, and I should say that we did one of these last week as well, talking ghost lights and Fresno nightcrawlers. You can still watch that video. Just check out social media or tonight's show notes for the links. So I hear that the skies over places like Los Angeles have remained clear for nearly 3 weeks now due to the reduced traffic as a result of our shelter-in-place order. So maybe now would be a good time to fix your gaze skyward. Perhaps like Dan in Iowa, you too will see something you can't quite explain.
Hi, my name is Van. I am calling from a small town in eastern Iowa called Anamosa, and I just wanted to tell you about something that I saw a couple years ago. Well, I can't remember the exact date or year. I know that it was summer, not too long ago, maybe 3 years ago, and I was driving later at night. It was, I'd say, 7 or 8 p.m. on Highway 151 between Anamosa and Cedar Rapids. Now that it was a very clear night, it wasn't completely dark, but it was definitely darkening. So there are no clouds in the sky, and that stretch of highway, it's super open, so you can see like the entire sky, horizon to horizon. But anyway, I was driving, and I noticed a strange light in the sky, and obviously there's an airport near Cedar Rapids, so I'm like, oh, it's just a plane. But the thing is, it was moving way too fast to be a plane. It was like zipping across the entire sky, and it was changing colors. And I'm like, oh, at first I thought it was like a drone, or I said a plane, but the thing is, it was, as I said, moving way too fast. Like, it started at one end of the horizon, and I watched it move across the entire skyline really fast, and then I was like, maybe it's a shooting star or something. But the thing is, I could distinctly see it changing colors, like from purple to blue to red to green, and then it wasn't just moving in a straight line like a plane would move, but then I saw it like make a clear arch, like a loop, and then fly back the other way. And I did that for a couple minutes. I was actually able to watch it for several minutes, and unfortunately I couldn't get a video or a picture because I was driving at the time, and I didn't want to be on my phone while I was driving. But eventually I just saw it dip behind a tree line and it never came back up. Now, I'm not exactly what you'd call a conspiracy theory enthusiast or a skeptic. I'm not like a firm believer in aliens or UFOs or cryptids, but I'm definitely open to the possibility of them. I just know that what I saw, I try to logically explain it in my head, like plane, drone, something. But just the way that it was moving and the speed at which it was traveling to be able to move across the entire open skyline like that quickly, I haven't been able to think of an explanation. I know there probably is one. Maybe you can figure it out. But yeah, I just thought I'd call it in because I still think about it to this day. I don't share it with too many people just because I don't want people thinking I'm crazy, but I just know that I saw something that night that I know it was a UFO because it was flying, it was an object, and I couldn't identify it. But yeah, I just wanted to let you know. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Dan. Given the behavior that Dan described, I don't believe this to be a drone, a satellite, or even a commercial aircraft that I'm aware of. Something I should have mentioned a while ago that might apply here. There are a pair of apps that could help in eliminating any misidentified UFOs. The first one is called Skyview, and it allows your phone to highlight celestial objects, labeling them, telling you exactly what they are. real time. The app can even identify satellites and the space station. And the other one is called Plane Finder. That one does the same thing but identifies planes in your airspace. There are free versions of both of these apps. And to be honest, there's probably better options out there, but these will at least get your foot in the door. So now the next time you see something in the sky you can't quite explain, with a few swipes of your phone, you can at least rule out a few of the logical explanations. Now, just a disclaimer, that was not a paid endorsement, just some apps that I think might help. So thank you again, Dan, for sharing your encounter. Oh, real quick before I move on, I'm trying one last time to reach out to Lydia near Zanesville, Ohio, and Mac from Mississippi, the Mac that broke his back. I really want to share both of your calls, but the audio is terrible on each, and both of them cut off halfway. So please, if you can, resubmit today. Now, our Patreon subscribers found out the hard way that I bent a few rules in the latest episode of Monsters Among Us Beyond. I actually shared what I could of Mac in Mississippi's call, despite the fact that it was filled with static, and regardless that it cut the story short. It was that incredible. How is it that it's always these wild calls that come out low quality or just simply cut off halfway through? Maybe I'm just that lucky. Enough yammering. Play a story already. Well, how about this? Here is Michelle's entry from the state of New York.
Hi, Derek. Happy New Year. This is Michelle calling from Queens, New York City. I was just listening to your most recent episode, and someone decided to share a creepy doll story. And it reminded me of a weird experience I had when I was about 10 or 11, maybe even younger. Back when I was a kid, I used to have American Girl dolls. I don't know if you can use that or not, but American Girl dolls, I don't even know if they're still popular, but when I was a kid, I used to have really bad night terrors and really bad anxiety and really bad dreams. And there was one night I had a dream that one of my American Girl dolls had come to life. So the next morning, I immediately tell my mom, I don't want these dolls anymore. I'm freaked out. And, she just kind of brushes it off because it was just a dream. So I go back in my room and I don't even want to touch them. And I remember going to move into the dolls, and I watched its head slowly turn towards me and make a sound. And I freaked out, was not having it. Nope, wasn't having it. So, and I think that night we were going out somewhere to a family party. And so my mom, in order to ease me, was like, fine, I'll take the dolls out of your room. We'll put them in a bag. Whatever, I'll leave them in my room. Okay, great. So we get home that night from the family party, and my dog at the time was freaked out, would not come out from underneath the dining room table. Lights were on in my parents' bedroom and in the kitchen. It was just very strange. The next morning, my mother shows me the garbage bag with dolls in it, and it's like, okay, I'm throwing them out. They're going to be gone. Don't worry about it. And at the time, my grandparents were still alive, so I'm hanging out with my grandmother. Downstairs was in a two-family house, and I hear it sounded like someone going through garbage, lifting open garbage bags, carrying through stuff. And I immediately jumped up, told my grandmother, and my mom had thrown out dolls. I refused to go look outside. So my grandmother did, and my grandmother was big into the X-Files and everything paranormal, and she just looked at me and was like, yeah, the garbage bags are ripped open. And I was like, okay, this is great. As an adult, though, my parents just moved from Queens out to Riverhead, Long Island, and I have no idea how real this actually was, because I never saw the dolls ever again, even after they moved. So I don't know if my mom had lied and said she threw them away and kept them, and now I don't know where they are, or they actually crept out of the garbage bag. I have no idea. All I know is that it was a very freaky experience for me. I'm sure my night terrors and my anxiety and my overactive imagination as a kid had something to do with it, but hearing that doll story, I had to share. I dig the podcast. Can't wait to hear more this year in 2020. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Michelle. Anytime that I hear about creepy dolls, one place immediately comes to mind. A place that would sure to give anyone with the fear of dolls or pediophobia a heart attack. A place called the Island of the Dolls.
Located on the canals near Mexico City, this island is one of the world's creepiest destinations. In the 1950s, Julian Santana Barrera left his family and isolated himself on the island. Legend has it that after finding the body of a drowned girl, he hung her doll in a tree as a means of honoring her. Once it allegedly moved and made noises, his lifelong obsession of stringing up dolls in the trees began. In 2001, Barrera's body was discovered having drowned in the same spot as the girl. Nowadays, Barrera's family runs the island, ferrying tourists to visit the countless dolls. According to local legend, the dolls have been known to whisper and move.
Now that clip comes courtesy of Watch Mojo. Now I'll be honest, I'm not real sure what to make of this island. I mean, yeah, sure it looks spooky. It is covered in rotting dolls after all. But back to Michelle. I thought I should point out that someone could have seen the bag, somehow noticed what was inside. Maybe one of the doll's faces was pressed up to the plastic, and a keen-eyed youngster noticed, Wolverined the bag open, and made off with her loot. Free American Doll girls. But then I must ask myself, how do you explain the dog's strange behavior? And more importantly, how did the doll move on its own? Well, I'm sure it comes to no surprise to you guys. I can't answer either of those questions. But I can say, thank you, Michelle, for sharing the experience. Now, before we move on, I just wanted to mention that we're still accepting pledges in our Kickstarter campaign for our upcoming documentary, Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle. The good news is we have hit our goal, but I'm not lying when I say that's not enough. We have a couple stretch goals in place. One releases a blooper reel, and the other, a featurette, featuring some of the desert treasures, lost gold and pirate ships, that kind of thing. So if you have the disposable income and you would like to support, head over to Kickstarter and search Shadows in the Desert today. Now, do you guys remember a season or two back when we talked about the strange, white humanoids? I even created a bit of a contest to try to name these things, not realizing somebody had already done so. Well, Ethan in New York remembers. Something tells me he'll never forget.
Hey, Derek, this is Ethan from upstate New York. I love this podcast. The reason I even started listening to this kind of podcast is because when I was about probably 9 years old, I lived in a place called Steventown, New York. It's right on the border of like Pittsfield, Massachusetts, at the around the Berkshires. And when I was younger, I had this experience with two of my friends who I don't even talk to anymore, so I can't even get in touch with them to find out if they remember it. But I was probably about 9 or 10. It was summertime, and I was getting ready to sleep over at my friend's house, so we decided to run through this little path, that was in the woods. It was only like 10 feet deep of a path. You could even see his house from my house. That's how close it was. But to the left of it, it kind of got a little more woodsy, and we heard something from over there as we're getting ready to run over there, so we stopped at the corner of my house, and out from the woods comes what you guys call the pale crawler, the white crawler. It came out, barreling, running out, almost like a way an ape would run, running on its feet, but using its hands as well. And it broke into a field about 10 foot from the wood line and stopped and stood straight up and turned and looked over at us. And it was probably a good 7 or 8 feet tall, extremely thin, completely white, no facial features, nothing. No eyes, no black voids or anything like that, just pure white. And it looked at us for maybe 10 seconds and then turned around and disappeared into the woods.
it's always been hard to talk about it because every time I try and tell somebody about it, they look at you like you're crazy. The closest depiction of it that I can come up with is this picture that you'll find on Google. If you Google the rake, it looked like that exactly, except it didn't have those, facial features. But yeah, so that's my story. That's my encounter. Thanks.
Thank you, Ethan. There they are again, these pale crawler things. If you recall, we heard several accounts of these things way back in Season 7. Many of those accounts stemming from places like Indiana, Kentucky, and now New York. But unfortunately, that's about all we have to go on. That and a handful of blurry YouTube videos. But there is one blurry video that's been floating around that's really caught my attention. The video was taken back in 2017, somewhere in Northeast Ohio. A man named Rick Grebenek uploaded a video that seems to show some sort of tall, white, humanoid creature in his backyard. Now, from what I understand, Rick had claimed that the creature had trespassed into his yard for several nights in a row. Finally, Rick was able to prop up his iPad against the window to capture a nearly 7-minute-long video featuring the creature. What he caught was an odd-looking white humanoid that emerges from the tree line near the back of his property. The creature slowly and cautiously shuttles forward, awkwardly bent over the entire time. The kicker is that Rick filmed through the mesh of his window screen, so the camera really never gets a chance to focus. But luckily for us, Rick narrated as he filmed. Here is a segment of the audio from that video. What you're about to hear is Rick quickly setting up the iPad. Then he frantically dials his friend on a landline. While they talk, the creature slowly makes its way into the yard. It seems to come within about 30 feet of the window that Rick is filming from. Here's that clip.
It's gonna believe me. It's the only one that will believe me. Damn phone.
Hey, Mickey G.
Hey, Mike, I need you.
Hey, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
A little bit. Yeah.
All right, you're not gonna believe this. I got it on video now. People think I'm nuts. It's on video. It's playing right now. I put the iPad in the window, and now this thing's coming up to the steps in my backyard, Mike.
What's coming up?
It's like a weird, demonic-looking thing, and it's like a human, and it's all scratched down. And this is the second time this happened this week. And as I'm talking to you, this is all on recorded, and it doesn't see me. I'm in that, that sunroom. All right, I've been putting the iPad out. It's about around, and it happened. This weird thing's been happening around this time at night.
Can I record it?
You're on record. Everything's recording now. I can see the thing. It's like looking around weird.
You're recording the video?
Yeah, right now it's on the video. It doesn't see me. I'm sitting back, but I can still see out the window really good. You should see. No, it can't. But it's looking around like something out of a weird sci-fi movie. This thing is freaky.
Not a person?
No, it's an evil identity. It's evil entity. This thing's like wicked looking. But it's in a human form though. You gotta wait until you see the video. I got it on video. Oh my God, it's like a gargoyle, man.
Okay.
I got it on everything, and and everything. The whole thing right now. It's the iPad's recording everything. Me, you, and this thing. And I don't know. I should. What's the police gonna think? It's looking. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Dude, this thing is weird. Just
sure it's not somebody should call the police?
Yeah, no, it's a demonic creature. It's not human. And it goes back. It just went back. It dove back. It wobbled back in. I can't even explain it.
Went back in the weeds?
Yeah, like it knows something's going on. I got it now. I got it on tape. Yeah, just pray. Wait until you see this thing, man. just pray. This is really freaking me out because 3 nights ago, I'm laying on the couch. I heard something open the door and walk through the sunroom as I'm laying on the couch. Then as I woke up, it was like gone. It was like it shot back through real quick. And I know I heard the door. Oh my God, there it is, Mike. It came back. Oh my gosh.
I command you to go in Jesus' name.
This thing is looking weird. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. It knows something's going on, man. This thing is...
Now that clip comes courtesy of Rick Grebenek. And I highly encourage each of you to either hit up the show notes or simply YouTube search Evil Creature Caught on Tape by Rick Grebenek. Grebenik. And watch the full video. Now you might want to turn up your brightness all the way so you can get a really good look. At a certain point, Rick and his friend begin to pray, and the creature seems to react. But I'll save those details for the video. But like so many other subjects we cover on the show, the more we unearth, the more mysterious things seem to become. But just one more thing. I can't help but notice that these things began to show up around the same time that those full body suits did. You know what I'm talking about. Picture the Green Man from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but in the optional white. So is that a coincidence? Or are there pranksters out there accidentally creating cryptids? Thank you again, Ethan, for sharing that experience. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Addie Lloyd. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And that gut-wrenching score, that's co.ag. And before I duck out of here, I just want to take a quick second to thank everyone working in the medical field right now, especially those on the front lines battling this terrible virus. And for the rest of you, even if it hasn't been ordered yet, please do the smart thing and stay home. I need all the listeners I can get. Thank you all for listening, and until next week. So do you guys remember that anonymous call from Iowa that kicked off the show? You know, the one that told of a tall man in a girl's summer camp cabin. Well, I happen to have an update, so please welcome back our anonymous caller from the state of Iowa.
Hi, Monsters Among Us. I called earlier this morning. My story was the one about the Bible camp with somebody or something coming into my cabin in the night. This is so crazy, like so crazy. A few of my fellow staff members and I just went on a prayer walk all around camp. And I definitely forgot to mention in my first call that we are in Iowa and our camp is on the Skunk River. And I remember in the first season of this podcast, there was a man who called in talking about like a Bigfoot sighting on the Skunk River or something along those lines. This is so weird. I can't believe this happened today after this call that I made. But yeah, we went down to the lagoon, which is just a little offlet from the Skunk River where we like let kids canoe and that kind of thing. And we were praying, and it's kind of dark out, but there's enough light from the moon and enough light from some of our street lamps, like along our sidewalk, that I can see pretty well down by the lagoon. And so we're standing on the edge of it, and we're all praying over it, like just for protection, that kind of thing for the kids. And this weird, like, clicking sound. And at first I thought it was like some kind of frog or some kind of insect. But then I look up and I see in one awkward but convenient little clearing in the trees, right across the lagoon from where I'm standing, there's just a figure of a man. It didn't look like any kind of Bigfoot or anything that I've ever heard of, but it definitely looked like a person. It was just a very dark, shadowy figure that was definitely not supposed to be there. And I'm just so shocked that this happened the day that I called you. I just think that's absolutely insane, and that I totally needed to call you back and tell you about this. Yeah, I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit shaken right now. This happened like 20 minutes ago. I hope you enjoyed my weird double story. Bye.
Thanks again, caller. The way I see it is this. We only have a handful of options here. One, this is some sort of coincidence. Maybe the girls fueled their own fear with made-up ghost stories, and our caller simply saw a man that was out for a walk. Or perhaps there is a man, the same man, stalking the camp, always in the shadows, watching, lurking, waiting. And then, of course, we must consider that the man is a ghostly entity, forced to roam the grounds of the camp for eternity. Then there is this final theory, and our caller even touched on it a bit. Could this quote-unquote man actually have been a Sasquatch? The girls mentioned that the man was wearing a long-sleeved brown shirt. Could they have mistaken hair for the shirt? They also mentioned the height of the man, being above average. And our own caller's experience occurred at a water source near dusk. Prime time to see local wildlife. And as our caller mentioned, this experience took place on the very first night. So let's say hypothetically, a Sasquatch-type creature took up residence in this area, realized he can get water from the spigot by simply walking into this unlocked barn, something it probably does nearly every night. Well, this night, it just so happened the cabin was suddenly filled with children. Now, I don't know if any of that's possible, but I will leave you with this little nugget of knowledge. Although Iowa isn't exactly the first state thought of when it comes to Bigfoot sightings, the state is no stranger to the big guy. According to the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, there have been 76 reports of the creature from that state. And get this, a majority of those reports occurring in the 21st century. So thank you again, caller, for sharing, and thank you for sticking around to the end of the show. Have a great night. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome to the final regular episode of Season 8. And I have this thing absolutely stuffed with first-hand encounters. So let's not waste any time in getting started. Our first submission of the evening is hauntingly good. Please welcome Alex and his personal experience to the program.
Hey, Derek. This is Alex from Central Virginia. I've been enjoying your show incredibly a lot recently, so I decided I'd give you a call and leave you a brief tale of my own poltergeist experience. It probably started when I was 5 years old, 1995 or earlier, somewhere around there. I remember when I was living in Northern Virginia, we were living in a fairly, I would say it was a pretty new development. It's kind of a suburban neighborhood. And when I was sleeping at night in my bed, I remember looking at my closet. It was an open door at the closet, and the clothes hangers were swaying back and forth, kind of like somebody had pushed them, and they had started this kind of pendulum motion, first towards the wall, then back towards me, then back and back and back, never really letting up. And I remember getting out of bed and going up closer and looking at it, thinking it was just sort of odd. But it didn't freak me out because, I didn't really know anything about what that could be or what could be causing that. So the next day, I told my mother, I saw my clothes hangers swaying back and forth, and she told me that it could simply be a trick of the eyes. That, the darkness can do that to your perception. And so, I just figured that's what it was. Darkness is weird and makes you see things that aren't really happening. And, for my whole life until pretty much now, I kind of just thought that that's what that was. I've started thinking about it more recently because we moved down into a much more rural area in about 1998, kind of a countryside. We built a new house, and it really kind of scarred me emotionally, honestly, to just pick up and go to some place where I knew nobody, and I couldn't ride my bike around the suburban neighborhood or anything like that anymore. It was just a big change, and it really it had me up all night crying for nights and nights on end. And I feel like that might have, that just emotional outburst might have triggered something to attract itself to me. Because from that point on, pretty much, I was deathly afraid of being alone. I was deathly afraid of the dark, which was something that occurred before the move. So every night I wouldn't go to sleep unless I was sleeping directly outside of my sister's bedroom, because I just couldn't stand being too terribly far away from somebody, as if there was some sort of a presence that was sort of observing me, is kind of how it felt. Anywhere I would go, if I was alone, I felt like there might be something just sort of lurking invisibly in my periphery. I felt like it wasn't family. I always wanted to be with somebody, and I couldn't be in the dark especially. So that's sort of how I felt for a really long time, until I turned like 13. I couldn't even sleep in my own room by myself. I would go to sleep in my own room. I was in the middle of the bed with my head between the two pillows. I would put my head on the pillows. I felt like it exposed me too much. So between the pillows, just looking around until I would just fall asleep. And if the family was up watching TV and it was past my bedtime, I'd go upstairs, pretend to go to bed, and I would sneak down the stairs and crawl around until I could get to a place where I could watch the TV with them without them knowing I was there. It was that bad. I was just deathly afraid. And my family, being fairly devout Protestant, would have the deacons in the church pray over me, knowing that there was here. And they attributed it to horror movies, which did certainly scare me quite a bit at that age. But after a while, all that fear just sort of faded, and I started growing up and becoming angsty. And I think around the time between I was 16 and 19 was when things actually really popped off. But thankfully, that fear having faded, I think out really well, because it started again when I was going to the bathroom. For some reason, everything happened in the bathroom. I was, taking a whiz, and we had like air freshener aerosol can hanging out on the counter, and it would start shaking back and forth rapidly. And I would pick it up, looking at it quizzically, and I could sort of feel it as I was picking it up, trying to shake in my hand. And then once I got it off the counter, and I'd set it back down, and nothing would happen. And I thought that was really, really odd. Didn't really scare me. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And quite some time later, I would see like a empty can of Coca-Cola on the counter with a bit of moisture beneath it, and it would sort of float atop that almost invisible moisture on the counter, sort of spinning, rotating very slowly and drifting a little bit, and thought, that could be the cause. But at the same time, this thing was shaking rapidly. It wasn't drifting. And so as loose of a explanation as that could be, that's kind of what I played it off as, even though I knew it's probably not it. That actually happened twice. Once I picked it up and put it back down, it stopped shaking. And the second time, this was, all within a couple of week period, I picked it up, set it back down, and it continued to shake. So I picked it up, set it back down again, and then it stopped. That was weird. Okay, but, nothing's harmed me. There's nothing to be scared about. But then I went to another bathroom one night, and same thing, taking a whiz. And this is the bathroom I brush my teeth in, and I have a little glass that I use to rinse out my mouth at the end of brushing my teeth. And this night, as I was taking a whiz, finishing up, turn around, and that glass moves clear across the counter. This counter's 4 or 5 feet in length, maybe. It moved clear across the full length of that counter, really with purpose, I guess I would say. It wasn't slow. It was just, and then it was there. And I saw it in plain sight. So I picked it back up, set it back down where it was, and said, this goes here. And ever since that day, nothing of that sort has happened to me ever again. Honestly, it felt kind of victorious. I felt like I've defeated whatever it was that was trying to mess me by asserting my own will over its. But after having seen all that, thought about things moving on their own, it reminded me of that day when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I saw those clothes hangers swaying back and forth in my closet. And I thought, has anything else ever tricked my eyes in the darkness like that? And no, I can't really think of anything that has. Anything that I have observed up close that seems to be moving that actually hasn't been. And I think back when I was really young, those clothes hangers were actually moving, and that something may have attached itself to me at one point in time, and didn't really go away until I've basically told it that, listen, I'm not scared. Yeah, since then, nothing's happened. Whether that thing still wants to feed on my fear, I don't know, but it's been about 15 years or so since the last encounter I've had. I've lived a pretty normal life without much unexplained happening, so I could say I'm probably done with whatever it was. Knock on wood. No, thanks for listening to my call.
Thank you, Alex. There's perhaps another element to this story that Alex may have overlooked. You see, many paranormal researchers claim, or at the very least suspect, that some poltergeist activity is actually caused by adolescent children in the home. It's further theorized that these children are somehow able to generate energy, affecting their surroundings. Now, I have no idea how this is supposed to be connected. I attempted to find some respectable information on the subject, but unfortunately I came up short. So is it possible that in some way, somehow, Alex was the cause of the chaos around him, without him even knowing it? Now, as strange as that sounds, I was pulling calls for this episode and I stumbled upon the following shortly after listening to Alex's submission. I felt that the synchronicities were at least worth pointing out. Not to mention the fact that our second caller's kids may have also been the cause of the activity. But I'll let you be the judge of that. The following was submitted anonymously from the state of Wisconsin.
Hi, happened last year. I have 5 kids, and right now 3 of them have bedrooms downstairs. We have a finished basement. My 2 sons share a room downstairs. My daughter has the other room. This happened over a few months, lots of different things, mostly downstairs. There must be something weird about the bathroom down there, because both my boys have heard things in there while they were in there. My younger son used to say that he hears someone calling his name a lot when he uses the bathroom, or he would hear someone say his name behind him if he was in the bathroom. Not like he heard us calling from upstairs or calling from a different part of the basement. He would hear a voice call him within the bathroom when he was in the bathroom. It always scared him. He said he didn't know the voice. It didn't sound like any of us. It was like a high-pitched little girl voice. Sometimes he would say it came from the ceiling, and that's odd because they usually can't even hear us call them from downstairs. If we call them from upstairs, they usually can't hear us, so I don't know how he would hear us through the ceiling. So that was weird. My older son has used the bathroom down there and has heard laughing in the ceiling. There was one time in particular, he was only here with our daughter, who's 15, and he heard a high-pitched laughing in the ceiling. And I said, well, it was probably just her, like laughing outside of the door, or her pranking you or something. And he said, no, it did not sound anything like her. And she's always said that was not me. I didn't do anything. She was just upstairs. She didn't know anything about it till he came up and said that he heard that. And it's really weird. All these things, yeah, they do prank each other. They do try and scare each other sometimes. But it's always like they tell on themselves, kind of like, oh, haha, I got you, or whatever. It's not like a prank that they always deny for the next year and a half. So, I don't know, I believe them. They've always been really scared. They know something's up. Oh, when he heard the laughing in the ceiling, it was a high-pitched girly laughing, and he said he looked at the ceiling tiles above him, and it seemed like something was moving on top of the tiles. Now nothing. We don't have any rodents or any squirrels or anything in our house. We never had a problem with that. But he said that he thought the ceiling tiles moved around like something was up there. Maybe he was just scared and he imagined that, but I don't know. But yeah, we have those little foam like drop-in ceiling tiles that are really lightweight. So it's not like a person could be up there or anything. Other thing that was really kind of the first thing that scared my youngest son, I told my boys to go down to bed, and I would come down and say goodnight to them. You know, I told them to go brush your teeth, go to the bathroom, go get in bed. It takes them a few minutes to settle down and everything, so I was just doing some stuff in the kitchen. I was going to come down. My younger son started yelling and screaming and crying. He was terrified. I went down there. He almost couldn't talk. He couldn't get it out. He was so scared. The lights were on in their room still. They weren't already asleep or, laying down. They both had just gotten in their beds and they were there with the lights on, just fooling around. My younger son has top bunk. My older son has bottom bunk. My younger son said he saw a hand reaching up into his bed. I thought, well, that's just your brother tried to scare you. He was reaching for you, he's going to scare you. No. My older son said, no, I did not do that. It's been a year and a half. He never has changed his story. He's never said, yeah, I did that. I tried to scare him. No. He said, I did not do that. I did not do that. Well, my younger son said that the hand reached up over the edge of the bed and wiggled back and forth until he started yelling, and then it went back down. He's still scared. Once in a while he'll talk about the hand he saw in his bed. My older son was down in his bed on his tablet at the time. He wasn't fooling around with his younger brother. He wasn't trying to scare him. I believe him. And then, once in a while he'll talk about it. But one of the last times he told me about it, he said it was red and white striped. And I heard that on another caller. He had a red and white striped guy that was running next to his car when he was falling asleep driving. And it was always the same story, that the hand was there and it wiggled back and forth, and then it went down when he started yelling. But he only said the last few times that it was red and white stripes, so I don't know if he was 6 when this happened, so maybe he just didn't realize that was something weird he should tell me. I believe him. I don't know. It's really weird. You know, sometimes when you're a little kid and you tell somebody something, you think that they can see what you saw, or like you can picture it in your mind the way that they saw it, and he didn't realize that he should have told me it was red, white, striped hand. So very odd. Just don't think his older brother was pranking him or his sister was scaring him. She wasn't in there. I don't think anybody had a glove on and wiggled their hand back and forth. Who would think that that would scare somebody so bad? But I hope you can use the story of the podcast. Hope to hear this soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, caller. There was another element besides the adolescent-driven poltergeist activity that I thought was worth mentioning. Longtime listeners may remember me discussing an Unsolved Mysteries episode from back in the day that dealt with the haunting of a home, and it all seemed to stem from the young boy's bunk bed. Weirdly enough, that story also comes out of the state of Wisconsin.
In early February of 1987, Alan and Debbie Tallman brought home a bunk bed they had purchased at a second-hand furniture shop. They assembled the bed and stored it in their basement.
That's right, didn't we? Well, look at...
When the bunk bed was moved upstairs, it marked the beginning of 9 months of horror for the Tallmans. From the moment the bed was first slept in, the house appeared to be haunted by spirits that terrorized first the children, then the entire family.
You're getting so big for Daddy.
I was afraid for my life. I also was very afraid for my family. I had visions of coming home from work and actually seeing my family destroyed, brutally murdered, or just laying there dead.
The house where the Tallmans lived had no known history of hauntings, and the Tallmans had never in their lives given ghosts a second thought. They are regular churchgoers. Debbie is a housewife and mother, and Alan is shift supervisor in a manufacturing plant. They are credible and responsible citizens, but their paranormal experiences have left them deeply scarred. They ask that actors portray them in this story and that their children's real names not be used. The Tallmans feel they were in a battle with forces they do not understand, a battle they were destined to lose.
Of course, that clip comes courtesy of Unsolved Mysteries from NBC. I've linked to the entire Tallman video in the show notes, and I highly recommend you guys check it out. You know, as if those coincidences weren't enough, our caller also mentioned that the hand her son saw was white and red striped. And as our caller pointed out, that description sounds eerily similar. Back on episode 15 of season 4, I shared a call about a man named Alan that also saw a man painted red and white striped. Here is that call.
Hi, Derek. This is Alan in Mesa, Arizona again. I was recently listening to episode 3 of season 4 and Caitlin's account of the skinwalker. I've had a similar experience living in Arizona all my life. This event happened in approximately 1990 on the San Carlos Indian Reservation in southeast Arizona. It was late at night. I had been to the car races in Globe and was returning home, driving down US 70 to Safford. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was fairly tired. I was only 17 years old, and I was driving along, and it started to slow down because I was getting sleepy. I just passed through the town of Peridot, and I don't know, I had probably slowed down to about 40, 45 miles an hour. As I was driving along, I heard a tapping on the side window of my truck. Not thinking about it, I was concentrating on the road. It tapped again, and then a bang. And I looked over, and there seemed to be a person running next to me on the road. So it kind of freaked me out. I dropped her down the third gear and took off. Got down the road a few more miles. Kind of woke up by now. And as I went through the small town of Bylis, got past there, started getting sleepy again. So I began slowing down, and again, there was a tapping on my window and then a bang. Looked over, and it was the same figure running next to me. It was a tall, pale man with red stripes painted on his body, and he was keeping pace with me, like I said, at about 40, 45 miles an hour. So I, again, switched gears and took off. With that being said, I was driving through the San Carlos Indian Reservation, which is an Apache reservation, to reference Caitlin's story in the episode. And I got home, kind of freaked out, now wide awake. It's right around 2:30 now in the morning. Talked to my dad, didn't really say anything to him about the situation, just that I got in late. Fast forward to 1993, I'm stationed in 29 Palms, California with the Marines, and talking with my roommate, telling the same story, and he goes absolutely ghost white. And I said, "What's wrong, Johnny?" He had a roommate earlier who lived in Lordsburg, New Mexico, that drove the same route that I drove when he went home on leave, and had the exact same experience only 2 years previous to that. So that would be 1991. So just thought I'd give a little bit of light on the Caitlin's experience, and hope you like the story. I will call him back in more again. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
So just like most of these other stories, I'm left completely stumped. I couldn't begin to guess what these painted men are, or where they're coming from. Nor do I understand why the first two stories seem to describe very similar experiences. Right down to the mention of the bathroom activity. But what I can say is that I absolutely loved all three of these stories. So thank you again for the amazing submissions. Now this is just the tip of the iceberg. I have so many more amazing tales to share with you, but we may as well get these announcements out of the way. Follow the show on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And don't forget about that Facebook group. If you have a story you would like to share, simply call the hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or visit the Report Your Sightings tab on the website, which is monstersamonguspodcast.com. Many of you may have noticed that earlier this week I released a Patreon episode to the general population. Thought that would be a good way for you guys to kind of get an idea of how these new Patreon shows are being played out. Essentially, it's the exact same thing you're listening to here, except I have a little more freedom. If you'd like to sign up, simply visit patreon.com and search for Monsters Among Us podcast. Yesterday, Jerry from Hillbilly Horror Stories dropped an interview that I did with him, I guess last week. So if you'd like a peek behind the curtain, I highly suggest you check out that interview. It's Hillbilly Horror Stories. You can find that wherever you can find fine podcasts. So as you've noticed, this is the last regular episode of the season, which means the next episode is our Hometown Legends special. And this one is ramping up to be massive. So I'm going to need a couple weeks to put that thing together. So look for that episode to drop sometime in the first week of February. And lastly, the totes are on their way. They should be listed probably by this time next week. And on top of that, I reordered the Brett Manning shirts. So if you were looking for a black Brett Manning shirt, now's your time. Hop on over to the shop at Monsters Among Us Podcast, click on the shop tab, and pick up whatever you would like. And that was a new song by the group 8-Bit called Bigfoot in My Backyard. 8-Bit is a band out of New York State, and a big thank you to Bradley for sending that song in. Awesome work, guys. Well, since we played a little Bigfoot song, I figured why not play a Bigfoot story. And Randy out of the state of Washington has one that's downright bone-rattling.
Hey, well, my name's Randy from Washington State, and I listen to your podcast. So I figured I'd chime in a little bit. Stories from back in 2005. Me and my cousin were up hunting on the border of Washington, Idaho, Canada, and we're about 23 miles from the closest town, and we're about 6 miles away from anybody near where we were at. We were up just trying to see some deer season. Went down an old logging trail. Haven't been used in a long time. And we knew it ended up as an old pond, and down the left side of it was like a hill drop, and it kind of circled up towards us, and we sat in that area for a little while, and on the right side of us was a hill, and we were sitting there for a little while, and some does popped up, and probably about 20 minutes, the little does were still hanging around in front of us, less than 50 yards, and down below us, we could hear branches breaking down below us, and it kept coming towards the left and started crawling up that hill. And as it got towards the top of the hill, we heard a growling screech like we've never heard before. And me and him are both pretty familiar with bears, wolves, cougars, all that jazz. And those deer went running right by us, and I mean within feet, like we weren't even there. And at the same time, we could hear what sounded like giant footsteps running on the hillside, just boom, boom, boom. But the strides had to be really big, and we could hear, some big logs, old rotten logs breaking at the same time, just because of the distance it covered. We went up there to see if we could see what it was, never got a sight of it, saw some big imprints, but nothing that was definite on what it might be. But it kind of freaked us out because I've never seen a deer run by us like that before, so we decided to hightail it out of there. We went about 2 miles away, and this was another big bull, I guess you could say. Drove down in this bull, and we get down there and we see something that's a little odd looking, something that we've never seen before. And it was this half-built teepee built around a big tree. And it was probably about 8 feet tall. I'm 6 foot, and it was taller than what I could reach. On the inside of it was hundreds and hundreds of bones. And what we could recognize was part of a cougar leg, a couple deer bones, skull of a moose. To this day, we have no idea what it was. It was all pretty fresh, and it reeked. That entire area was a smell I hadn't smelled before, a mixture of decomposing and something else. But it was pretty weird to see all those bones all lined up like that. And then, so of course, we go into town trying to find out what the deal is about that area. So we talked to a couple locals. And I won't say where because they don't like it, but a guy said they don't talk about that stuff in town, but asked where it was, and all he had said that there's been a lot of sightings of some big creatures up in that area, and everybody stays out of there, which would probably suggest why we never saw anybody around there. And what was interesting, less than 6 months later, we went back up there, and the whole area had been logged out, and that whole bone pile was gone. So, hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I suppose it's obvious that the loggers didn't report their discovery of the mysterious bone pile. If they had, I'm sure, at some point we would have heard of it. Even if the structure and collection were made by a rogue human, you'd think something like that would be newsworthy. That is a strange collection of items. And perhaps I should have led with this question, but are there animals out there that would collect bones in this manner? Obviously, they're not making lean-tos, but is it possible that they found one a human previously made and decided to make it their home? Now, I'm certainly not an animal expert by any means, but I do know a fair amount about wildlife, and I cannot think of a single animal other than a human that would pile bones up like that, at least not in North America. Perhaps someone listening has some intel that I'm not privy to. If that's the case, I'd love to hear from you guys. So thank you again, Randy, for taking the time to share that. Hopefully, it's just a crazy porcupine with a calcium deficiency. But if they're collecting moose skulls, cougar bones, I don't know. All bets are off. Thanks again, Randy. Now our next story takes us to southwestern Pennsylvania. The following is Johnny Moe's story out of the Keystone State.
Hey, Derek. This is Johnny Moe from Pittsburgh. The story I'm about to tell you took place a little over 15 years ago in August of 2004. It is my last night of summer vacation before I started my senior year of high school. I was with 3 friends, and this happened in the small town of Portview, Pennsylvania. Now, there is an old legend in this town that states that the local Little League field was built on a Native American burial ground. And we'd heard it from time to time again, and it just became hearsay. And a lot of us thought the parents had made that up to keep people out of there at night because of the secluded location. Now, this baseball field is located not far into the woods, but far enough where you wouldn't want kids running around unsupervised. It's also adjacent to 2 local cemeteries, which we thought at the time was the origin of this legend. However, as I digress, I can prove that that is not the case. So, 3 friends and I were venturing down a dirt path that leads from the main road to the baseball field area, because I just want to stress that the 4 of us were sober at the time of this story. However, that was not our intentions as we ventured off into the woods. Unfortunately, that night it did not come to that. So, as we were walking through this, it was approximately maybe 9, 10 at night, warm, dark, a little bit windy, and I remember it vividly to this day. I had heard a bunch of voices talking, several young voices, sounded like children, but we couldn't understand what they were saying. We could just tell that the voices were coming from deeper into the woods near the baseball field. Granted, we figured it was just other kids like ourselves out having fun the night before classes started. So we walked a little bit further, and we approached the baseball field from a distance. Granted, it was probably about maybe 100 feet away, and we were at a slight elevation due to the multiple hills in the area here in southwestern Pennsylvania. So we had a pretty good vantage point of the entire scene. Now, the field was lit up with yellow safety lights, not real bright, just enough to let you see what's happening down there, unfortunately. And we saw about at least a dozen different figures, children, running around the field. And it didn't occur to me what I was seeing at the time until I noticed that they were translucent. I saw one look me right in the eyeballs and realized that I could see the trees behind him through his body. And they all had a dark brownish hue to them. They weren't shadow people. This was something else entirely. And I froze in my steps. I was so scared that this was happening. I refused to notice that, my other 3 friends had already started running out of there. They realized what was happening as well. So I followed suit, running back up the path where we came, and I swear to this day I heard someone chasing me out of those woods in the tall grass, and I looked behind and no one was there. So we made it back to the main road and we regrouped, talked about what we just seen. Now, most of the people there, I still talk to this day, and one of which refuses to acknowledge the incident even happened. The other 2 admit something happened, but the 3 of them really don't like speaking about it. Personally, it kind of started my whole interest in this subject here, and I just want to say thanks for your podcast, because that's what eventually led me to. And because I know you research every one of these stories, if you research the town, it's Portview, spelled V-U-E. Now, this is an important piece of information I'm about to share, because this is what really opened my eyes and scared the crap out of me. Years later, I was trying to find any information I could whatsoever on this burial ground by researching online. And there was very, very minimal information just because of the, how should I say this, unpopular nature of this particular town. Very small, no reason for anyone to go there unless you know someone that lives there. Well, it was years later, I was doing some research online. I found a website called Tube City Online, which features the history of the city of McKeesport and the surrounding communities, Port View being one of which. And on this website, they have multiple documents in PDF form, one of which was a newsletter sent out to the residents of Port View in 1976 for the country's bicentennial. Now, in this document, there is a small history of an archaeological dig that took place in the town of Port View in the late 1800s and carried on through the early 1900s. And in this specific area known as Portsmouth Drive, it was found a child cemetery from the Neolithic era. Now, when I read that, my blood just kind of went cold there because I realized that, well, it's certainly explained a lot of what I was seeing as well as some of the other things we heard about the area over the years. And talking to some other people that live nearby, there's a row of houses located not too far from this area that a lot of people believe sit on top of the Native American burial ground. People I've spoken with said they've seen Native Americans inside their basements walking through walls telling them that they need to leave immediately. Some people have vivid nightmares, wake up, they see them inside their bedrooms, things of that nature. One of these stories actually came from a local police officer who lived on that street and was not inclined to lie. So I went to high school with some of his children. So that's my story. Thanks for all your good work, man. Just found your podcast recently, and I've been playing the heck out of it every day here. Keep up the good work. Later.
Thank you, Johnny Mo. Johnny Mo took my advice, and it paid off. Research the area of your sighting. Johnny Mo did just that and uncovered a children's cemetery. Now, of course, the simple presence of a children's cemetery in that area doesn't solve the case, but it does lend some anecdotal evidence to Johnny Mo's claims. Now, coincidentally, my dad actually runs a trucking route through that area, so next time I talk to him, I'm going to ask him about some of these legends. Maybe he's heard of them. So thank you again, Johnny Mo. I can't imagine laying eyes on such a spectral scene. So our next story of the evening comes to us from a world away. The following is Theosha's Call from New Zealand.
Hi, Derek. This is Theosha. I live in New Zealand, and the story takes place in New Zealand, just off of the south coast of the North Island. This is basically a response to the Season 8, Episode 8, Dimension Door. Well, I don't think I saw a dimension door. It was a rectangle with a red light. Not like the whole rectangle was lit up. It was, for me, it looked like a UFO. I was just outside taking out the garbage, so it was on a Tuesday in like August last year, so 2018. Yeah, so I'd been living in the place for long enough to like know the cloud cover and things like that, and just because of relationships, I know all about drones and what they sound like, what they look like, and this was a completely silent hovering object, and it was similar to the Episode 8 story about up on a ridgeline. I live kind of in like a little nested valley. So like I'm very familiar with the stars and things like that, and there wasn't any clouds, so it was like, but it was just this black rectangle that had the appearance of not being too far up, like above houses on the ridgeline, but not far up. I'm not going to post any pictures, but anyway, kind of crazy. I didn't see it go anywhere. I went back inside to get my phone, and by the time I came back out, it was gone. There's nothing there. So that was really unsettling. The fact that I couldn't see it across the sky, I don't think it would have been able to travel as fast as it should. So maybe the whole closing thing is what I missed.
but I just thought I would call and share my story. You have a great show. You have a great format. But yeah, I hope you can use this for the show and that you continue to make the show. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you, Theasha. Like the first 2 calls of the episode, this one too was part of a running string of synchronicities. If you remember back to episode 8 of this season, you may recall Jeff's call from upstate New York where he described seeing a red rectangle in the sky that seemed to close like an elevator door. He even sent in a photo of the incident. Well, what if I told you that Theasha isn't the only caller to chime in regarding Jeff's original submission? In fact, the following was submitted by David in the state of Arizona.
Hey, Derek. Hey, this is David in Arizona, beautiful Arizona. I live about 30 miles southwest of Phoenix. If you get a map and draw a line, you'll see that there's not a lot out there. We're just surrounded by desert and sky. In this area, because we have Luke Air Force Base out to our northeast, we see F-22s, F-35s, F-16s, and then, Sky Harbor traffic. We see a lot of commercial. So I see a lot of night sky. I know what I'm seeing. So the area that we live in is, I guess you could call it UFO-ish. There's a lot of sightings out here. I haven't seen anything, not a thing, a lot of airplanes. Nice clear skies. But again, I haven't seen a traditional UFO. But the story I have is UFO related. And what prompted me to call is the gentleman in upstate New York that saw the elevator closing, the portal kind of thing. Because I thought I was crazy. The story I'm going to tell you is a little nuts. So, and I've never told anyone this. It's just one of those kinds of stories that, nobody would believe you. But maybe your listeners would, and you, I don't know. So anyway, in the middle of the night, a lot of times I'll get up and look around. I sometimes have trouble sleeping, so I'll go out in the back and just kind of walk from side to side of the property and, just hang out and, go back to bed, that kind of thing. So it's about 2 o'clock, I don't know, maybe a year ago, something like that. And I walk out in the back and I walk kind of to my right, which leads to the northeast sky. And I look up and there is a disc. When I say disc, it's so hard. It's like something that's about, 10% of the moon. Okay. And it's gold, radiating it's the light, but not like moon light. And it's in a place that it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Things would have to be huge to be way up there in the sky and look like that. So anyway, round object, dim gold glow, but bright enough, pretty color actually. So, I'm looking at it, I'm like, what is that? So I do what everybody else does. I look down, I look back up, and as I look up, this thing is getting bigger, like if you were to think of a camera iris getting bigger, and it got to be about the size, half the size of the moon. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, holy, what is that? That's impossible. It's in a place where the moon doesn't even go to that area. So anyway, this thing's half that size. I can't say I'm freaking out. I'm just like, what in the world? Because it's happening pretty quickly. And of course I didn't take my eyes off it again. So as I'm watching, it starts to get smaller, just the same kind of deal, like an iris closing. And then it was gone, right? And I'm like, I'm still looking, and a little tiny dot comes out of it, like if a satellite, right? We've all seen satellites going across the sky. That's what it looked like. And I followed that thing, 45 seconds until it disappeared. So here we have whatever that was. If you were going to do like a science fiction movie and have a portal, that's what you would do. So it's like that. That's really it. So I appreciate what you do. I was never a huge UFO fan because most people make fun of it, and even the other shows that take it seriously make fun. But the calls and your take on it really give people a reason to call. And I hope you have an idea of what this might be, or more people have seen this, because it was amazing, and it was something I felt like I was honored to see it, because it's just not in our frame of reference. I mean, that's why I've never told anybody. But anyway, I hope this helps, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Thanks, Derek. Bye.
Thanks, David. I love that David is so reluctant to call this thing a UFO. To me, that tells me that he's very careful with the words that he throws around, and that he also knows what the weight of a word like UFO carries. In short, it somehow makes Daniel's story more believable. And I know what everyone is thinking. What are these things? Are they some sort of craft? A projected light? Or perhaps a doorway to another dimension? If this is something involving our military, why was it witnessed over New Zealand? And I suppose the most important question of all, are all these things connected? Until the day that info is shared with us, I suggest we keep our eyes skyward. You never know what might be up there. Thank you again, Theosha, and thank you again, David, for taking the time to share your stories. And that's going to bring us to our final call of the evening. And for this one, we make our way to the state of Michigan. The following is Eric's call.
Hey, Derek. My name is Eric. I am calling from Michigan. This story took place in probably around 2004 in Livonia, Michigan. There was a place called Ardmore Center, which is an abandoned mental institution, or whatever it was. And me and my friends used to go break into it, and it was shaped like an L. So the bottom of the L would be facing the road. So once you get across the road, you'd really quick run across, and then you'd be behind the bottom of the L, so you would be blocked from the road. And on 2 occasions, we had the first one, it like had a light snowing, and we kept hearing it sounded like footsteps in this like wet snow. And so we went out and looked, and there was footsteps that stopped in the middle of the field, and there was all woods around it. The second time we went, and me and my buddy were walking up to this window, and it was kind of like a ground floor window. Like it was, on the ground and then 3 foot up, but the inside was like 4 foot down. So it was like a half submerged, it was a hallway of some sort. And we were walking up with flashlights, and this guy with a flannel shirt just comes walking across the hallway, didn't even look at our flashlights, didn't acknowledge us. And my buddy was in front of me, and he immediately like shot up and looked back at me and goes, and mouthed the words like WTF. And I was like, dude, I saw that. Well, then his brother was looking up in one of the windows and said he saw some bouncing light in the windows at the same time, and we kind of got the chills. I went in there with other friends, and I got lost in there, couldn't get signal reception, and then I think the last time we got stopped by the cops, and he kind of just was like, get out of here. He could see that we didn't have like spray paint. We weren't trying to vandalize anything. We were just looking. So we started to ask him, and I was like, have you had anything scary happen to you? And he was like, well, I've had to search a few of you out of there because for some reason signal, you don't get reception in there. So I've had to go in and search out. But then he put his hand on his gun and he goes, but luckily I got this. He was kind of weirded out by the whole situation. I just thought it was funny. I've been hearing about the flannel man a lot, and that's exactly what we saw. Was a dude wearing flannel with a big beard, and it was cold, and he just walked right by us in this like lower level through the window, and both of us saw it. But it wasn't like a real person. It was like you could see through. It's really hard to explain. It was just a really weird experience, and both of us saw it at the same time. So it wasn't just me, it was somebody else. But that place has since been taken down, and there's a subdivision there now. It was called Ardmore Center in Livonia, Michigan. We went to a lot of other places, so I have other stories, but I'll leave it there for now. And I enjoy your show very much. Thanks for letting me call. Bye.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so I've heard of the flannel man before, and it's my understanding that it's a phenomenon not unlike the mirrored man, an enigma with many questions and very few answers. I also know that if I had a flannel man question, there's one man that might have the answers. The host of the Strange Familiars podcast, and a man I'd like to think of as a flannel man expert, Timothy Renner. Timothy and his wife Allison were kind enough to record a little segment about this little-known phenomenon. Please welcome them both to the program.
This is Timothy Renner, host of Strange Familiars podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Allison, who's also my wife. And the reason she's sitting beside me is we're talking about this flannel man entity, and she was the first person I knew to experience this phenomenon back in the mid-90s. Tell us what you saw, Allison.
We fell asleep kind of routinely. At the time, I slept on the floor of my bedroom and you were sleeping over. We were listening to Nurse with Wound's Thunder Perfect Mind, which has this very rhythmic, kind of hypnagogic kind of drumming into it. And sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up, and when I woke up, I saw what looked to me like an evil, brawny paper towel guy or like Yukon Cornelius, overgrown woodsman clad man. And I screamed, and everyone in the house came into the room because I think they thought you were trying to kill me.
Yeah, the only thing I remember is waking up to you screaming.
Which I think, like, now that I think about it, is the only time in my life that I've ever screamed audibly, like woken up and screamed audibly at the same time.
So what did you see?
I saw what looked like a lumberjack.
Standing at our feet?
Standing at our feet, bigger than life. It was just so taken aback by waking up in the dark and seeing something that I screamed, and it was just this, at the time, the scariest thing I could have imagined.
And you said he had not a really intimidating look on his face.
I mean, he wasn't supposed to be there.
Right, that was the scary part.
That's the scary part. Somebody's not supposed to be in your room that isn't invited. But he did look kind of like he was caught. He wasn't making a move towards hurting me. He was just there.
So this happened in the 90s, and some time passed after that. I don't remember if it was 6 months or a year or 2 years before I had looked on some internet forum and found people talking about this flannel man entity, which I didn't tell you about then for another decade or more.
Yeah, I overheard you and one of the other co-hosts, James, kind of talking about how I had seen something. But I couldn't imagine, like, that didn't even occur to me that that's what you guys were talking about.
Yeah.
Because it just didn't seem like a paranormal experience. It just seemed like a weird, freaky dream that I had.
You're our resident skeptic at Strange Familiars, and I mentioned...
I'll own that.
I mentioned offhandedly that even you had experienced something, and I mentioned this flannel man character. That really burst open the floodgates, and we started getting account after account after account of people who had seen what we call flannel man. It's not one entity, it seems to be an army of different fellows, and even women. We've had a couple flannel women accounts as well, who wear these checked or plaid shirts. Most often buffalo plaid, red and black. Not always, though. We've had some yellow plaid, we've had some brown plaid, we've had even some blue plaid, I believe. For a while, we were getting reports almost weekly. We still get a lot of reports. We've done at least 4 full shows on Flannel Man on Strange Familiars. And we've had lots of other Flannel Man stories in other episodes that weren't fully dedicated to Flannel Man. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what he is. I can tell you John Keel talked about these entities in the 1970s. I can tell you that there was a mine collapse in the 1940s in which a guy in a plaid or checked shirt walked out of the wall, told the miners they would be saved, they would be okay, and walked back in the wall, and they could not find the doorway from which he entered or exited. The miners were saved, by the way. His prediction was correct. Theories as to what this guy is have ranged from everything to a watcher on the threshold to something like the Men in Black to a modern version of Odin walking through the world.
I think he would have been missing an eye.
We have a Flannel Man story about a guy missing an eye. So whatever it is, it seems to be cropping up. It seems to be some sort of archetype or thing that people are seeing in many strange situations. I'm sure we will get more Flannelman stories on Strange Familiars, as I'm sure Monsters Among Us will get more Flannelman stories as well. It's definitely a thing. You can go to strangefamiliars.com and find all of our flannel-related content there as well.
A big thank you to Timothy and Allison for taking the time to share that info. So here we are again. It seems these flannel men are similar to our old friends, the Mirrored Men, in that they were little known until people began sharing stories on shows like Timothy's and mine. And just like many of these strange experiences, we're left with twice as many questions as answers, and a thirst for knowledge that is practically unquenchable. But with each story we hear, and with each story submitted, I can't help but think that we're inching ever closer to the facts, to the answers, and to the truth. Thanks again, Eric, Timothy, and Allison for taking the time. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Addie Lloyd. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And that terrifying music you're hearing, well, that's code.ag. Thank you so much for listening, and until next week. Oh, you stuck around. Well, I haven't done anything with the grab bag segment in quite a while, so I thought, let's grab bag tonight's written submission. So, sight unseen, the following story comes to us from Jay in the state of Maine. Hi, Derek. I grew up in Port Elizabeth, Maine, not far from Stephen King's birthplace, and this experience sounds like something straight out of one of his books, and I wish it was. In the early 1980s, I must have been about 4 or 5 when this occurrence happened. It was close to Christmas and it had been snowing. I went to my backyard to build a snowman. It was getting dark and it was getting gloomy. Quite eerie already. At the bottom of the yard was a fence which backed into the woods. And sat there on the fence post is what looked like a small human. I froze. My parents didn't have any gnomes or garden ornaments, and I was initially filled with dread. Then I saw it move, and it turned to face me. I don't know if this thing was a gnome or a leprechaun or something else, but whatever it was evil. I could tell by the sense of dread it was filling me with. It wore a dirty green and brown outfit with a pointed hat and had a white, bristly beard. He didn't speak, but I could, hear him speaking in my head. He asked questions. I didn't reply to them. But it was as if he knew the answers anyway. He tried to earn my trust and lure me closer to him, because he had something he wanted me to do. But I didn't move. I could tell he wasn't being truthful. He wanted me to do something terrible. I don't know if I should say what he wanted me to do, but it involves setting a fire. And he was almost begging me to do it. My mom opened the back door and came out to call me in for dinner. Then the gnome, or whatever it was, and I remember this part vividly. It jumped off the post into the snow and scurried into the woods. The way he moved from the top of the pile gave me the creeps. And the only way I can describe his walk is how people with dwarfism walk. But he was no more than maybe 60 centimeters tall. My mother didn't see him, and I wish I went to see if he left tracks in the snow, but I was too scared to even go near the end of my backyard ever again, in fear of being taken somewhere. I never told my parents because they'd think I was crazy or making things up. I can't remember anything from this time in my life, like what I got for Christmas that year or what I ate that night. But I remember this, as if it happened just an hour ago. I saw it a few more times as a young child, but would always come inside before he could quote-unquote speak to me. As I got older, I never saw him, or saw him less, at least if I did. I suppose my subconscious probably didn't want to acknowledge it. It freaked me out so much that I moved as far away from Maine as possible. I now live in California, so I think I've accomplished that goal. My parents still live in the same house. I visit them most Christmases with my family, but I'm always terrified that I'll see that thing again. Or even worse, my kids will. Thanks for the show, and I hope you can use my story. Jay. Well, thank you, Jay, for taking the time to share. As crazy as this story sounds, this is not the first time I've heard an experience like this. And this next bit of information may not be what Jay wants to hear, but a majority of the cases that I've heard about, ironically, take place in the state of California. In fact, if you go back to Monsters and Mysteries in America, there's a case of a small gnome-like creature that fits the same exact description that Jay gave, and it actually took place somewhere in Central California. So thank you again, Jay, for taking the time to share that story, and thank you for sticking around to the end of the program. Have a great night. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Happy New Year and welcome to the show, and welcome to 2020, the year that we finally catch ourselves a Sasquatch. I have one hell of a show lined up for you guys this evening. Happy New Year and welcome to the show, and welcome to 2020, the year that we finally catch ourselves a Sasquatch. I have one hell of a show lined up for you guys this evening.